Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us for continuing coverage of the Alec Murdaugh double murder trial. I'm Andrea Mock. We are back outside the Colleton County Courthouse for the sentencing. Last night, Judge Clifton Newman saying that he knew many people may want to speak at the sentencing, so he was going to postpone it and push it back a day so that those who wanted to speak could do that. And I want to tell you, we saw the family of Mallory Beach walk in. We saw Buster and John Martin Murdaugh walk in last night. All right, we're going to go ahead and toss. They are speaking now. Let's listen into what they have to say in court.
All right.
Judge Clifton Newman just remains so likable. You heard a bit of relief in his voice there as he said he got to use his gavel. Court is adjourned, and you could hear that. But 2 life sentences, not 1, but 2. And I would definitely call this a scathing sentencing from Judge Clifton Newman to somebody he formerly knew, formerly worked with. I also have to say, this is one of the first sentencing I've seen, and I've seen a lot of them, where there was talk back and forth between the judge and the defendant. But there was in this case. Now, a couple things that he said that really stuck with me. Judge Newman said, you know, this qualifies as a death penalty case, 2 murders, they were aggravated. And he said, I have to think your family has prosecuted people in this county for about a century, and they have sent people to death for less. Pretty impactful statement. So then is the moment that he asks Alec Murdaugh to talk. He says, what was that you said in court again about a tangled web? What did you say? Well, Alec spoke up and he repeated himself, and he said, we're looking right now at Buster Murdaugh walking out. He has been here every day, steadfast with his girlfriend and also his aunt. I saw him walk in this morning. He was with JMM, John Martin Murdaugh, who also was on the witness stand and testified. Today, John Marvin also with him walking out of the courtroom. Again, John Marvin taking the stand and Buster taking the stand as witnesses. In this case, and both of them believe that Alec Murdaugh didn't do it. Of course, the judge and the jury felt very differently, but again, so Judge Newman was saying, what was that you said again about a tangled web? And Alec repeated, well, I lied and I had to continue to lie. And he said, Judge Newman said, yes, and then after you went up there, you continued to lie, and then you had to tell more lies because you were caught. Another poignant moment was the fact that he said, I know you have to see Paul and Maggie when you go to sleep at night. I'm sure they visit you in your sleep, and I hope you continue to see them and remember the last time you looked into their eyes. Whew! That was rough. Alec, of course, trying to twist that and said, oh yes, Your Honor, I see them every day and every night. Then he went on, and Alec said, I respect the court, but I would never hurt my wife, Maggie, or my son, Pawpaw. And then Judge Clifton Newman said, well, it may not have been you. And he took a dramatic pause, and I thought, oh, wait a minute, where is he going with this? And he said, because when you testify to taking 20, 30, or 40 opioid pills a day, it wasn't you. He said, I've seen that many times before where there's been a defendant standing in front of me, and the person who committed that crime was a person who was on drugs and was not who they were. And then he said, listen, your story that June 7th was just an ordinary day, that you were fine despite the fact that you had stolen $500,000 and your law firm was onto you for stealing $500,000, despite the fact that he called Mark Tinsley a tiger and said there was a tiger on you. And your father was dying. You testified that it was just a normal day for you. He said that was not credible and not believable. Okay, I want to bring in my friend, News 19's Sam Perez, who has been in the courtroom. Sam, I know she literally just walked up with us. You missed what I said, but I said that was a scathing sentencing speech from Judge Clifton Newman. What did you think?
It absolutely was. I think when he touched on his personal experience, having worked with Murdaugh, having seen Murdaugh in the courtroom, having known his family, Judge Newman said that, it was unfortunate, I think is the word he used, that his family was such friendly people, that Murdaugh himself was so friendly, to then now where they are with Murdaugh not only disbarred and losing his law license, but also now convicted of murdering his wife and son. I think Judge Newman really pointing out that personal connection he had, and he knew Murdaugh before he says he turned into a monster, likely because of those opioids he was abusing.
Something else he said that I thought it almost was like he was baiting Murdaugh or asking Murdaugh to explain it. He said, now I understand there will probably most certainly be an appeal, so you don't have to say anything. He said, but I have never had a defendant who has been convicted, found guilty, look at me and explain why they did it, what they were thinking. It was almost like he was goading him, like, go ahead, tell us what happened. Why did you snap? Why did you do this? What did you think of that moment?
No, I agree. And then what I thought was interesting is he said in all of his years, he doesn't know if he's ever seen a defendant be able to recall the moment that he pulled the trigger. And I think that was, a pretty powerful moment, just asking Murdaugh, like you said, almost goading him, not expecting him to necessarily admit any guilt, but really talking about that crucial moment where he pulled the trigger.
Last night we didn't see any emotion as the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. He's guilty of murder of Maggie, guilty of the murder of Paul, and guilty of possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Absolutely no expression on his face. But I have to say, Sam, and I want to know what you think, I felt like I saw emotion in Alex's face as he was getting the scathing review from Judge Clifton Newman, somebody who is peer, and we know in this testimony that Alex's reputation means everything to him. Alex, the way he feels about himself, the way the community feels about him. So to be standing up there in handcuffs and ready to be led away and being convicted of murdering your wife and murdering your son, I definitely saw him grimacing. What did you think?
I agree. I think, as you mentioned, Judge Newman is, his peer, has worked with him before. So I think being convicted by a jury is one thing, but then having someone who you've worked with in the past, who you know on a relatively personal level, delivering that life sentence, I think is, powerful. And then also, last night, it was the moment he found out that he was being convicted, and now he's had the night to think about it. He had to sit there in court in a jumpsuit, different from the suit that he's been wearing previously, and he had to face the fact that he has now been sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his wife and son. So I certainly saw more emotion from him, I'd say.
I think Prosecutor Creighton Waters did such a fantastic job in this case, and one of the things I will always remember is he was trying to draw the connection, and you talk about all the people that Murdaugh is accused of defrauding, and actually on the witness stand he admitted. So I know we keep saying accused because technically he hasn't been convicted of those crimes, but he admitted on the stand to stealing the money. But anyway, I remember Creighton Waters saying, tell me what that conversation was like when you sat down with those clients. And he talked about, of course, Tony Satterfield, and talked about Hakeem Pinckney, and talked about the Plyer sisters from Columbia. What did you say when you looked them in the eye and you stole money? He couldn't remember. He couldn't remember those conversations, or at least wouldn't admit it. And then last night, and he was trying to say to the jury, listen, if he could look these people in the eye, people he cared about and respected and lied, he's lying to you too. But he said last night, right up here, when they came out, when Alan Wilson and Creighton Waters spoke, he said, you know what? I hope this is Alec Murdaugh's last con. We are live now outside the Colleton County Courthouse. I'm Andrea Mock. This is Sam Perez. Both of us have been here from the very beginning. Sam in person, me back at the studio listening on headset, following every moment of this trial. We heard guilty and guilty and guilty last night, guilty on all counts. Judge Clifton Newman giving a very scathing speech today to his former acquaintance, Alec Murdaugh, as he sentenced him to not one, but 2 life sentences. We also want to bring in our friend Rachel Ripp, who has been here as well. Rachel, I just got to ask, and Rachel, I'm going to be honest, is a lot taller than both Sam and I. Rachel, are you surprised by the verdict?
You know, I feel like this verdict was something that was reached very quickly. I know that was something that, talking to locals, talking to people here, it seemed like they would take a little bit longer. I was surprised by that time, but that did come down. As far as inside the courtroom, I got to see some reaction and see some of those jurors. There were 10 jurors inside to see that sentencing for themselves, to see that through, since they've been here 6 weeks in this trial. And I also saw some reaction from the family. I was kind of surprised to see John Marvin was not crying when those 2 life sentences came down. He's been crying throughout several parts of this trial, and even on the witness stand, he was very emotional. He didn't show too much emotion in there in the courtroom just now. Buster, his facial expression, he looked very just depressed, hopeless. He kind of had this glance like he didn't know what was next, but it was a very intense scene there in the courtroom, hearing what that sentencing was like.
I want to ask you this, because our viewers, we've all seen the jurors. Our viewers haven't gotten a chance to see the jurors. There was so much testimony, some of it very tedious. I know even listening to it myself, some of it I got lost in the minutia of the call logs and the pings and the radius and all that business. But watching the jurors' reaction, and I'd like you both to answer this, what were some moments in the courtroom that you really saw that the jury was reacting to the testimony?
Yeah, so first of all, I definitely saw the very first juror, who was then designated as, I believe, the foreman is what they're called. He was asking several times throughout the trial whether or not they could zoom in the screen, if he could see certain numbers, if he was not able to see just with the view of maybe someone blocking that screen. He was very adamant about actually getting that full perspective of what was being shown, of all that testimony. I also saw another juror when Alec was on the stand. It was the first day he was on the stand, and she actually pushed a tissue box toward him. Now, I don't know if that was maybe a Southern hospitality gesture, if that was something that she was genuinely concerned about him, but she did push that box forward, and Jim Griffin walked around, moved that box over to Alec.
Now, 2 moments that I really stood out to me where I thought the jury was, fully paying attention. One I mentioned last night was when the prosecution brought Ronnie Crosby, who's one of Alec Murdaugh's former law partners, back up on the stand, and then he was cross-examined by defense attorney Dick Harpootlian, and Harpootlian was fiery.
Right.
He was angry. He asked Ronnie Crosby if Crosby was angry with Murdaugh and therefore his testimony was biased, and it got very contentious between the two, even coming to Harpootlian asking Ronnie Crosby if he thinks that Murdaugh did it. So in that moment, I think the jury was absolutely perked up and paying attention. The other example would be the first time those autopsy pictures were shown. I certainly saw some emotion from the jury as they saw the wounds that the victims received. I think that was a hard moment in court.
Yeah, and I know from the prosecution, I've had a chance to talk with them, they felt that was important just to show the brutality of these killings of both Maggie and Paul. So we are wrapping up our coverage now here at the Colleton County Courthouse. Alec Murdaugh has been found guilty on all 3 charges and is sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. As you heard Judge Clifton Newman on the stand say, he has several other pending cases. There are several other cases he's going to be involved in that have to be settled, including the Mallory Beach lawsuit, boat lawsuits, lawsuits from stealing money from clients. So he might even ended up being sentenced to more. So this is really a sad day, but the day many people were hoping for, to see justice done. And as Creighton Waters said, Alec Murdaugh has had his last con. Make sure to keep it tuned to WLTX.com for all of the latest.